Okay, right. We are live stream from Contrast YouTube. Hello and good afternoon from Jakarta, human rights enthusiasts. Although it's a bit far too late for me to say, but welcome to 2022. And I'm wishing all the best and a joyous year since the pandemic have gone a lot worse than the last year. I really hope that the listeners here are having a splendid health situation there. Though, again, I have been engaged in this YouTube account for more than 3 or 4 months, but allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Nadine Sharani Salsabila, here as the A3T Secretariat. Now, I'm sure that some of you are still not quite familiar with A3T. So basically, A3T, or Asia Alliance Against Torture, is a collaborative movement in Asia to stop or to abolish torture issues and actions in Asia and from their own respective countries. Now, several CSOs here who have engaged with us are none other than Contrast from Indonesia. We have Swaram from Malaysia, Advocacy Forum Nepal, Medical Action Group from the Philippines, Masum India, Odikar Bangladesh, and many more. Now, today marks our fourth webinar of A3T, and on this day, we will discuss more and further regarding the topic that is written in the poster that you have maybe probably read in the Contrast Instagram or our Twitter, our Instagram, regarding the shrinking democracy in Asia, the experiences, the platinum experiences from HRDs. In regards to this phenomenon, it can be referred that the shrinking democracy in Asia is one of the most or one of the root causes of why human rights violations in Asia, especially torture issues, kept happening in the region. The implementation of the conventional democracy, such as the elections, are not enough to be the concrete base or answer to be the exercise of the word democracy itself. Even the exercise itself, it's not quite fair enough. Now, CSOs, through human rights defenders, have been uncovering and have been revealing multiple cases of torture and many other human rights violation cases to the society and even to the international entities. But instead of these actions revealed and reported to the international entities, states actually gave the CSOs through their HRD subpoenas and also forced summons, forcing them to enter jails, even drafting new NGO laws that has been, for example, practiced in Thailand, where they restrict human rights CSOs activities, including by receiving foreign aids or foreign funds, and even to the point of threatening the HRD themselves to prison if they don't shut their hands of the case. Now, without further ado, to discuss a lot about this topic that I have probably mentioned a brief earlier, let me just call the speakers who are about to discuss with me in this webinar around Asia, who will share their opinions and even stories about their experience to solve which are left untouched by the state. Now, first, allow me to call Mr. Muhammad Al-Shatri, the Right to Justice Coordinator from Suara Malaysia. Let me just say a brief hello to him. Hello.
Hello, Nadine. Thank you so much for having me. It's
Thank
my
you so
pleasure.
much. Yeah, thank you so much for participating as well. Now we have the next speaker in this webinar, Ms. Indria Fernida, the Regional Program Coordinator at Asia Justice and Rights, or AJAR. Okay. Hello, Ms. Indria. How are you today?
Hello, Nadine. Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, nice to hear you doing great. Now to our next speaker, Mr. Suren Pereira, the attorney law at Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. Hello, Mr. Suren.
Hello, Nadine. Nice to meet
Hello.
you today.
Okay, now we have here these three speakers are live with us, and they are probably very excited also with me to answer several questions that have been left untouched by the state or other CSOs regarding how democracy shrinks in Asia. Now, without further ado, I will just ask the first question to all the speakers, but maybe I want to go to Mr. Al-Shatri first to give his point of view, Malaysia's point of view. When you hear the word, Mr. Al-Shatri, the shrinking democracy or the shrinking civic space in Asia, in Malaysia, what are your thoughts and what are the relevant cases that has been happening there?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I won't take much time because I would like to hear from the esteemed, more experienced, my colleagues here, Mrs. Surin and Ms. Andrea. But when I heard about shrinking democratic space or shrinking civic space in general, so I will be thinking about the scars or the scarcity that involve the freedom of expression, freedom of informations, and freedom of associations. So these freedoms might be infringed by the use of laws or restriction from the government, or a climate, I would say, created by the governments or the governments that leads to the marginalizations of the voices of a certain group of people by the larger populations. This could be by the use of state apparatus, such as the police, the registrar of society, and so on, because there's a lot of arms and legs of the government that can be used to restrict these freedoms that I just mentioned just now. So going into cases in Malaysia, I would say we have a lot of restrictive laws, draconian laws, or even archaic laws that are present in Malaysia right now. One of it quite archaic. It was present since during the British colonial time. It is the Sedition Act, 1948. And that was used against opposition of the governments, members of civil societies, or even people who are undesired by the governments. When they speak up, they will always been used. These laws are always been used against them. Other than that, is we have for right now, because we shift things during the COVID pandemic, we see a lot of shiftings from physical arena to the online forms, right? So we lately have been seeing a lot of usage of the Communication and Multimedia Act, which governs everything's online, particularly the section 233 of that act. We also have sections 505, section 504 of our penal code that restricts any things that people may say but deemed by the governments would cause harm or would cause confusions or even anger by the publics. So these are the laws being used. So we can see in Malaysia in the past 2 years, since we venture into this pandemic time, there's a lot of crackdowns, especially in the internet sphere in Malaysia. The use of Sedition Act, CMA, and the laws that I just mentioned were used against people who are speaking up, even artists doing artwork that are quite controversial or even being seen against the governments were investigated or arrested under Sedition Act. So one of it, if you know the case of Fahmi Reza, the graphic designer, who have countlessly designed graphics art that touches the issues, a lot of different issues, even logging, the corruption cases in Malaysia. So he's been targeted towards of using these laws. Other than that, you can see that last year we had a big protest happening in Kuala Lumpur. It's called the Keluar dan Lawan protest. So we can see the trend of using the state apparatus such as the police to restrict this protest from going on. We can see the new trend. It was used before, but during some time it was not used. But we can see the recurring trend been happening again, where the police shut, I think, more than 50 over roads to prevent people from going to that protest, and even using the court system to get an ex parte order to restrict certain individuals from being in a particular place during a particular times. And me myself, I've been investigated for Sedition Act and also CMA for producing animation series on police brutality that tell stories of a 16-year-old boy has been tortured by the police. And also we can see that even you can get investigated for most trivial things. Even this news portal in Malaysia, Malaysia Kini, they are being charged or being investigated for a comment made by their readers in their news posting. So even the trivial things may land you an investigation or even arrest under this law. So I'll stop there. I will explain later on these issues. But thank you so much.
Okay, thank you also. So I highlight the case you mentioned before, that even the trivial things are either arrested or arbitrary, again arrested. But I maybe want to have a follow-up question. How does the international entity view this, and have there been any actions done to maybe solve several cases in Malaysia from the international entities?
We have international support from regional NGOs. I would say from A3T, from we have Article 19, we have Civicus, that this regional from Asia that have been telling our governments to stop using these laws against human rights defenders, also the normal people. So we have seen such support from at least from the regional organizations towards our governments, and also we'll be submitting our UPR reports, and we hopefully other countries as well will comment or will urge Malaysian government to stop using these draconian laws.
We really hope the best, because artists just expressing their thoughts on some cases, but they are targeted. That's just insane. But I will just hand the ball or the microphone next to Miss Indria. How do you feel this shrinking democracy in Asia? Maybe you want to comment first about what Muhammad said, or just blast on what happened in Indonesia. You may, Miss Indria.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think if we heard about what happened in Malaysia, it is also reflecting what is the situation in Asia, while the civil society is become a target for shrinking space and also criminalization. And this has become like a new pattern. How is democracy in Asia is being erased? Then it is also happened in Indonesia. As you might follow that we currently have a president who are coming from the civilian, but actually the situation of freedom of expression and also the freedom of opinion, they are decreased because of, it's not just because of their policy, but also they enacted many laws which is also make it a restriction for the civil society. This is quite different with the situation before we are coming on the democracy, when they are just easily attacked, like torture, arrest, kidnap. But now they are legitimize their work with the law, which is also our concern that we are dealing with this kind of situation. So, in Indonesia, I think we are facing various kind of human rights violation, at least related with the shrinking space. There's an attack on the freedom of expression and association, the religious freedom as well. Some of the minority groups also being a target and having a risk when they want to have express their religion and belief. The military existence, particularly about what really happened in the past and how impunity is ongoing, police abuse and extrajudicial killings. I think police abuse, I think, is still become a common situation in Indonesia. Torture is still ongoing, and violence and abuse in Papua. So this is also bringing the decent and political opponents, minority groups, marginalized people, human rights defender is become a target. So if we say about the shrinking space, this is the situation also in Indonesia. But I think recently we also face the situation then when they use also digital security for restricting civilian and civil society. So there's a part of the rising of authoritarianism in Asia. There's also a rising of digital authoritarianism, which related with the cyber fake news, surveillance, and also internet shutdowns. This also happened in Indonesia, particularly in Papua. If you follow one particular part in Indonesia, which is still happen on ongoing conflict. So if we say about shrinking space, that's also happened in Indonesia, and there's also many regulation still ongoing, including defamation, the law of electronic and information law. Yeah, treason is also still ongoing. So I think it's also the same with Malaysia. There's some of the law come from during the colonialization. It's still ongoing in Indonesia. So maybe if you see about the pattern, it's also quite similar with other countries in Asia. I think that's all for the introduction. We can discuss more. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I love the way when you told us it is very common for police and other security officers to use common practice of violence, since we see that it is pretty ironic because if we remember the Human Rights Declaration, it is said that the state have the job description to protect human rights, and we also have from Indonesia, Malaysia, and other many Asia countries have not only signed but also ratified several laws regarding the human rights. Human society have the rights to express their thoughts in many form of cases, but sadly, this is seen as an opportunity for the government to use the word defamation when they're being criticized. So this is a very interesting point from Miss Indria. Thank you very much for pointing out that in the perspective of Indonesia. Maybe I would again now throw the microphone to the legal perspective from Mr. Suren. So if you may, Mr. Suren.
Yes, Nadine. Yeah, for your question about shrinking democratic space, first I will quote few statements from the recent reports published. This is in 2020 Civicus report, like people power under attack in Asia Pacific. It says in Asia Pacific region where Sri Lanka is located, the top violation of HRDs freedoms during 2020 is the use of restrictive laws, such as laws related to national security and criminal defamation to prosecute HRDs. And in 2020, there were prosecutions against HRDs in at least 16 countries in the region. And the same report states that after elections in 2020 in Sri Lanka, human rights defenders and journalists have experienced harassments and arrests. And also there is another report, Freedom House annual report, Freedom in the World 2021. This report has categorized Sri Lanka as a country in spotlight that warrant critical observation in 2021 due to the developments in the country in 2020, which has affected this democratic cause. And there is another report that suggests, that is a VDEM Institute of the University of Gothenburg. The report is Authorization Turns Viral Democracy Report 2021. It says that Sri Lanka will face further declines in democracy due to its COVID-related responses. This means militarization. There are like many incidents of such suppression against human rights defenders and other civil society members, civilians. So extrajudicial killings. There are several recent incidents of extrajudicial killings of mostly it's against underworld. They were extrajudicially killed because there is if they reveal the names of some others who are related to these, mainly politicians and other people, then there will be an issue for them. So they were killed, and there are no cases for those. So there were like few in the recent history. And abused in detention, that also take place. Recently, we received a judgment. An incident happened like 8 years ago, around 8 years ago, in the prison. Like say 8 prisoners were killed in a they were called as a queue, and one by one they were killed. They were related to some political incidents, so they were massacred. We call it it's a prison, Velikada prison in Sri Lanka. So they were massacred, and very recently we received the judgment on that. So only the prison superintendent of the prison was convicted, but these people are related to different like various political incidents and such. So those names were never revealed. And arbitrary arrest and detention, that also prevails. I don't know whether you have heard of the human rights lawyer Hijaz Hizbullah. He has been in remand prison for almost 2 years now, in post trial situation. Still the trial has not commenced. He was arrested under Prevention of Terrorism Act, as he was accused for he's connected to Easter attacks in Sri Lanka. But mostly the civil society and the others believe that he was in prison for some other reasons, especially the political reasons. And torture, that is also something that we see day to day in our human rights cases and all. Police torture, that is there. We file torture cases in Supreme Court against police officers, and not that often we get good results for that. And we have Anti-Torture Act. We have criminalized torture in Sri Lanka, but we don't get criminal cases for torture. When we ask from the Attorney General's Department about this, they say like 1 or 2 incidents happen for 1 year, but that is not the case as we know. So the state, usually they don't prosecute criminal cases, though we have criminalized torture. Also, recently with this curtail of rights associated with freedom of expression and all, we have, as you all mentioned, and I saw this in the TOR as well, there are like many civil society like activists and other people were called to interrogations by CID and other terrorist investigation department for speaking. There are some incidents of speaking in the YouTube videos. This incident happened with a person called Shehan Malaka. He talked about the Easter attacks and connections to the current government with Easter attacks. So he was called to CID, and he was questioned for around 8 days continuously. This is from source is a YouTube video, and then webinar like this. So that is why I'm very careful, because even a webinar like this can cause arrest or criminal case in Sri Lanka nowadays. So a reverend priest called Father Cyril Gamni was called to CID, and he was charged in the court for talking about Easter attacks and the connections for the current government. And there's another incident of sharing a Facebook post caused to an interrogation by CID. So that was some people who were in a queue to get gas cylinders for, in Sri Lanka we use gas for cooking. So there are like long queues for that nowadays. So some people were in a queue, and the president and his vehicles was passing by. So they hooted at the president, like catcalling. So so someone has recorded this video, and it was in the Facebook. So this civil society activist, a woman, has shared this post, the video, and she was called to the CID to interrogate, and all what she had in her phone was copied by the CID, and she was thoroughly warned not to say anything against share anything against the president, and that CID has mentioned that it is a crime, which is not, as for our understanding. Other than that, like the monitoring human rights organization, CSOs, that is also very, it's very common at the moment, and the government is going to pass a new law to control CSOs. So there are incidents like many people, civil society members of these organizations were called to CID to ask about their funds and many such incidents. So yes, thank you.
Okay. This makes me want to ask more on how and who are actually the law enforcers in Sri Lanka, since, well, the media, CSOs are actually the watchdogs. We're like the publishers for the cases that are left just not just untouched, but also the reports are being neglected by the government. So who are actually the law enforcement in order to solve the human rights violations in Sri Lanka? I'm very curious in that sense. For what I heard also, based on the reports I have read before, human rights violations such as torture, arbitrary arrest, and etc. are actually neglected, but there is actually a law to defy that. So who are these law enforcers to ensure the human rights are upstand in Sri Lanka?
Legally, it is with the police, and even for torture, I said like the torture is criminalized in Sri Lanka. So this is mostly the torture is from police. So the people have to complain against the police. So again, the same people will conduct investigations. So there is a huge gap in investigations and prosecuting. So I think in other South Asian countries and other Asian countries, there are laws to criminalize torture and some of these enforced disappearance and these things. But the issue here is the people who investigate also are from the same institutions, and yeah, we are facing that.
Yeah, because I see the same pattern as Thailand, since this January that they have drafted a law that restricted NGO to do several things to voice their thoughts, and even several foreign funds are being held by the government, so they are restricted to come in and to fund those CSOs of human rights. So this kind of patterns I can also see it in India and Bangladesh, where CSOs and even legal officers are being monitored by the government and its agents to see that should this case be published or not, should this case be carried out or not, be solved or not. So that leaves a big mark of question of law enforcement in Asia as a whole. Okay, wow. This turns into a very, very great outcome for the first question. Now, maybe this also leads to the second questions on based on what have happened so far in Asia, where yeah, there is a law to conduct and there is a law to implement what should be done and what is democracy, what should be voiced out or not by the citizens, and what should the citizens do or not, what rights do they have. But still, what we have in the practice, in the exercise at the moment, is that CSOs, from the systematic attacks from the government, are being targeted when they try to voice out what should be done by the government, what are criticized. But so this leaves a big mark of question regarding democracy itself, where the governments around Asia voices out there should be democracy. There should be voices also from the citizens in order to build the nation and etc. from many other aspects. But regarding the criminalization of HRDs and other civil society, this is pretty much ironic. So maybe, and this kept also worse in Asia, especially from the speakers here who are the representative of their own country to speak upon this topic. So maybe I want to know more. Maybe I could go first from Miss Indria. What seems to be the root cause of the shrinking democracy in Asia, or maybe just in general in Indonesia, from your own perspective?
Okay, thank you. So I think we should realize that under the democratic era, there are some of the requirements of the good governance, yeah, including how the government has to respect for human rights and fundamental freedom, how the government has to provide the space for freedom of expression and opinion, but also related about how the accountability is ongoing. Because mostly on the democratic country, they were facing the situation when the authoritarian regime was conducted before democratic country. Then, after the democratic situation, of course, there's some of requirement of how the government has to building the independence of judiciary, transparency and accountability, including also how they will dealing with what really happened in the past. I think in Indonesia, one of the root causes because of impunity. We deal with very massive human rights violation in the past, but up to now, to be honest, there's no accountability, a proper accountability for the case. Yeah. So as you follow, if the if the authoritarian regime ended, then a democratic country has to establish the judicial mechanism for the mass human rights violation. They also, if possible, should develop the truth commission. They also have to deal with the reparation for the victims. But in fact, in Indonesia, we are not, and also institutional reform, yeah. And in Indonesia, I think we don't come in that stage. We had human rights court, but eventually all the perpetrators are acquitted. Yeah, we don't have truth commission, so there's no a clear understanding about history in Indonesia. So at the beginning of democracy, we are facing the situation that okay, everything what happened in the past was really a part of the state violation. But now, since we don't have any truth mechanism, the history is coming back, like now they said that, okay, what really in the past, then that's not true. We also coming with the propaganda when we had during the authoritarian days. Uh, and also there's no accountability for the perpetrators. I think if you follow that some of the candidates of Indonesia having a bloody hand on during the authoritarian regime, yeah, including some of the ministry. It is because we don't have a vetting agenda. We don't have some accountability process that all the people who are part of the human rights violation has to brought to justice. So in this of situation, the reform of police and military was not really integrated. Yeah, if you follow that, why torture is still ongoing because there's also a proper accountability for the police in the of police officer. If the violation conducted by military, they will brought to the military tribunal. Even though in our agenda on reformasi, on the reform, all the military perpetrators has to go to the civilian court. So this kind of situation, I think, is also bringing the root causes how the government is still is becoming more hard, more rough for the civil society, and also how they try to restrict the civil society. So what I call civil society is not just the human rights defenders, but also common people, peasants, journalists, even some of the opponents that try to criticize them. So this is, I think, is quite worrying. And again, if we say about the root causes, we have to deal with accountability. No matter if it's like a judicial process or non-judicial process, but there should be a mechanism that the government has to acknowledge what really happened in the past and how to proper the reparation for the victims. And I think this is could bring how the situation in country could be better situation. So institutional reform is not just about the how we should reform police and military, but how to reform the political agenda, the parliament, for example, how we should reform the media, for example, how they should become independent. So this kind of situation is lack in Indonesia. So it's just a partial reform, what I want to say. So this has become how the government is still ongoing to restrict civil society in countries. Yeah, I think that's situation in Indonesia.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very great insight. Yeah, this is a very new knowledge for me since maybe Miss Indria have said before that it is a partial reform, but it is supposed to be the higher ups reform or the parliament reform, to be completely honest, as the first step, and the accountability also. Since I just also realized that we don't have any derived or we don't have any derivative law to discuss further and to elaborate what is said to be democracy, what should be done by the government in order to implement the democracy, in order to solve the maybe gross human rights violation cases in Indonesia. So those basics are still absent in Indonesia, and that is why, since the higher ups or since the government does not have the accountability, it affects it creates a trickle down effect to the security officers and many other agents from Indonesia. I think that can be concluded into that sentence. Is that right, Miss Indria?
Yes, that I think that's one of the factor. So impunity is, I think, the main problem in
Yes.
Indonesia now. Yeah.
Yes, that is the main big question to solve. Thank you for pointing that out, Miss Indria. Now, next, I would like to go to Mr. Surin. Um, so, your perspective in Sri Lanka, what are the root causes of shrinking democracy in your own perspective? How does the government neglect the CSO and even try to restrict more and more the CSOs and many legal officers in Sri Lanka to solve the human rights past cases and also the recent cases?
Yeah, I think the main reason for this we can figure it out as the constitutional dictatorship that we are in currently. We with this current government, we passed a amendment to the constitution called 20th Amendment, and by that amendment, we further strengthened the powers of the executive president. And before, we had some checks and balances to the executive powers from the court, and president cannot in the uh, in the previous government and in the previous occasions, the president cannot directly appoint the judges in the Supreme Court and Court of Appeal, and especially the Attorney General. But with the 20th Amendment, we abolished institution called Constitutional Council. So before, that was in the middle. They have to affirm these appointments by the president, but now president can directly appoint judges in our courts. So we have lost the checks and balances in our constitution. So therefore, we have strengthened more and more the executive presidency. And so we are, though we are a democracy, we are in a legal way, we can say that it's a constitutional dictatorship. So the next problem is we are in a family-run country. If I say how it happens, like our president is his name is Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and prime minister is his brother Mahinda Rajapaksa, and finance minister is another brother Basil Rajapaksa, and minister of irrigation is Chamal Rajapaksa, is the eldest brother, and the youth and sport minister is prime minister's son Namal Rajapaksa. So all these positions are cabinet positions within the same family. So this family includes 9 ministerial positions with 7 cabinet posts. So like according to some estimates, like they control more than like 70% of the budget in this country. So I think that can cause many problems in a democratic country, and can easily shrink the democratic space. And if I say another reason for this shrinking of democracy is militarization. we are under emergency state continuously from now, like from a very long time, maybe 2030, more than that. Yes, we are under emergency state. So military involvement is very high, even with the COVID, and the military was appointed as the like military personnel were appointed as the chairmen of COVID task force and all these main positions. And if I say one as an example, like in September 2020, government launched an army run orientation program for newly recruited staff in public sector. So that is in everywhere, the militarization. Also, there's another reason, the impunity in our country. Since mid 2020, with this new government, there were like many cases against political affiliated people were withdrawn by that intelligence department. That is around 17 cases. So there were like people who were accused for murder, financial fraud, corruption. All these people were set free without cases. Their cases were withdrawn. Also, there was a commission appointed by the president to have some analysis in a way to find out which are the cases that they have to deal with. So around 40 cases were the commission decided there are around 40 cases that those accused should be released or the cases should be withdrawn. So from those, I now at the moment it's like 17 cases they have already withdrawn. There are like these cases are against politicians and other criminals. Also, the president has given 2 presidential pardons to another 2 murder convicted people. So, and after giving presidential pardon, they were appointed as one person is been appointed as the chairman of the National Housing Development Authority. So not only giving presidential pardon to the people who has committed murder and they were in the high positions in the government. So I think these are some of the reasons that I can say. Impunity, this the dictatorship, and these things that has caused to shrink in the democratic space in the country. And because of these things, as I mentioned earlier, the human rights defenders or civil society members, they know like if the government can create problems to them and can get away from these things, even murder or whatever the crime against the human rights defenders, that will not be go to a trial in a court, and maybe those cases will be withdrawn in the instant stages. So I think, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. 2 things that could be pointed out here from Mr. Surun is that first, the constitutional dictatorship, and also the absence of check and balances within the government, since the one who rules the governance in Sri Lanka, as I perceive, are those who are the inner circles, and they don't have any other circles to check and balance within the governments. So that's also a great point to add up. Actually, here, speakers, in the comment section from the YouTube channel, there is one great question from the audience, but I will head on to Mr. Arshatri first to answer the second question, and then I will head to the question written in the comment section. So, Mr. Arshatri, if you may.
Right. I think there would be a recurrence of themes that have been mentioned by Mrs. Horan and Mr. Indra as well, Ms. Indra as well, that have been happening in Malaysia. So I would say in Malaysia also, this shrinking of democratic space or civic space were caused by the strong presence of government institutions that actually caused by there's no separation of power among the governments that would lead to impunity in certain or a lot of human rights violation in Malaysia. I would say But however, when we see this strong government with a lot of apparatus and how they would able to use a lot of this apparatus to curb. So when there is instability in their governments, they would tend to further use this kind of institutions to curb human rights or civic space in Malaysia. We can see in Malaysia, we use a lot of the police. There's no check on police from the appointment of the Inspector General of the Police, or the appointment of the attorney generals, or the appointments of head of certain commissions like the anti-corruption commissions were all made by the Prime Minister. So they were all designed to make the governments unaccountable towards the people. I would say in Malaysia, we can see that they use the police to crack down on certain oppositions, even the marginalized community. We have the enforced disappearance that happening in Malaysia for the religious minority, such as two that I can mention is on Pastor Raymond Koh and Mr. Amri Sheikh Mat. They were forcefully made disappeared by the government, by which the institutions that were used were mainly the Home Ministry, which control a lot of these other institutions under them, which is the police, the police, the customs, the immigrations, and all other institutions that they can use to under their disposal. So other than that is we have a lot of, like I mentioned before, we have a lot of presence of archaic and repressive laws, from detention without trials to the use of specific laws to curb certain kind of freedom. Let's say, like I said before, we have Press Publications Act to curb the press. We have the Sedition Act for the oppositions or the general public. We have the Communication Multimedia Acts to govern the internet sphere. We have the Public Assembly Act to restrict certain kind of public assembly, and we have the registrar of society to prevent certain individuals or certain groups to register their own organizations. We can see that in a healthy democratic country, they should be allowed freedom of association, such as to have a new political party or to have new associations. So this can be seen where a lot of people, but like recently, there's two political party that the registration been blocked by a certain minister from being registered. So we can see this like the Parti Muda, Parti Sains Malaysia. So these were people who've been blocked from registering their parties. And also because of this, these laws actually originated from the colonial era. So there's no or lack of efforts to review or to look back on how the previous institutions or the previous form of government that actually been perpetuated by this colonial era were again being used by this current government. So there's the lack of reviews on the previous ways of the colonial use these institutions and use these laws to curb on oppositions. And again, the government's been using that kind of tactics as well. And also, there's no check and balance in Malaysia in terms of human rights or civil and political rights in general. We have national human rights institutions such as SOHAKAM in Malaysia, but however, the appointment of the head of this institution also been appointed by the Prime Minister. And also the reports that's supposed to be tabled in Parliament were not be tabled, even though it is within their mandates to do so. And also a lot of these institutions or these commissions, we are proposing, like for the police, we are proposing to have independent police commissions and misconduct. And also other commissions that are present at the moment will all be appointed by the Prime Minister itself. So we can see if these institutions were controlled by the strong government that I mentioned before, there's no way that we can have accountability from the governments. Recently, in Malaysia, we have this head of Malaysia Anti-Corruption Commission been accused of having a corruption himself. So we can see even the governments are backing up this head of institutions so that they won't be investigated under their wrongdoings. So this is situations in Malaysia, and also I would say there's a lot of lack of mechanisms regionally in Asia as well. We have like say in ASEAN, we have the ASEAN Human Rights Human Rights Commissions, right? But their mandates were very limited to discuss issues that were very light because there is a consensus approach to Aicha. So that like I would like to summarize a bit. There's strong governments, no separation of power, lack of oversight body, the presence of the archaic and oppressive law, and also lack of mechanism internally and also regionally.
Okay. Yeah. What could be highlighted and concluded from Mr. Suran's answer is actually a conclusion from all the speakers for this question, since again there are no accountability and proper check and balances for the government itself um to create the democracy itself for this civil society. And what I see here is that the government is using law as maybe a code of conduct or a standard operating procedure to restrict the number of civil society organizations to act when they have the obligation probably for the international society, the international entities, to be again the watchdog for the country, for the state. Now, moving on, here is a question from the audience. Her initial name is HB. Hi, thank you for the webinar today. Apart from the regional NGOs, has there been any support from other democratic countries or states, especially the West, from the West, or is there support lacking? Maybe I could head on to Miss Indria first, since she was nodding. So Miss Indria, please do.
Yeah. What is the meaning of support? Yeah, because it could be like a political support, a financial support, but also like some hard issue of support, like for example, using or supporting some tools or for violation. But in related to democracy, I think it is really depend on the situation in countries because to what extent that the regional or other country support, it's really based on the political will in each country. Of course, there are many mechanisms, including international human rights mechanism, UPR, or some bilateral cooperation between countries. But I think recently some of the Western country see the Southeast Asia, yeah, for example, Southeast Asia country is more democratic one. Of course, if we compare what is the situation in the past, and they think that the support has to become to the most difficult countries. Of course, I don't want to compare what is the situation in Afghanistan, for example, or in Myanmar, but in fact, there are need more support, of course, because the situation, the violation is ongoing. But I think on democratic situation, there is or there's no support from other countries. If the government decided to be a more democratic countries, they have to follow some of the human rights principles and also a democratic principle. Yeah, because there's also some requirement from the UN. For example, if you're coming for the democracy, you have to respecting a list of the respecting human rights. For example, so I think a part of this kind of support, we have to strengthening ourselves as an CSOs because I think this is one of the crucial issue. If the and also this is related with the shrinking pace, yeah. So democratic country has to be supported for the civil society who are have a free of speaking, free of provide expression, and also dealing with the human rights issue. If those requirements is not happen, this is really difficult to build a democratic country, because civil society actors is also a part of how how democracy in country has to be ongoing. So that's the reason why the regional entities, international entities has to be also support civil society, not just for the country entities.
Okay, so I hope from Miss or Mr. Initial HB can get that answer from Miss Idria's perspective. Maybe we could go on to Mr. Suran's perspective first before we go to Mr. Al-Shatri. So please, Mr. Suran.
This is regarding the next question or regarding that?
The question that is mentioned in the YouTube comment section. Beside from regional NGO, have there been support for Sri Lanka from the democratic states, especially from the West?
Yeah, I think there is always, we have received that sort of a support, but the issue is to what level we can like improve our democratic structures with that support. I think that is there is a gap in that, like the people like civil society organizations, human rights organizations, that support is needed, and we receive some sort of a support, even financial support, and in like when the human rights defenders are in danger, there is some mechanisms to support, but to improve our system, I think that support is not enough, and it is difficult to give such a support to people, because we are the citizens of this country, and we like the ordinary citizens can change this system, and for that our ordinary citizens, civilians have to change their minds, and they have to improve their knowledge about democracy. I think it is difficult to support such a change by a Western or any other country, any other organization. But I think they do their part, they support. Yes.
Okay, so maybe have the same answer as Miss Indria, that before we got the support or the insurance of support from the West democratic countries, we have to again support ourselves first. In regards to the acknowledgement or the knowledge for the democracy first, and also to strengthen the probably regional support first, and then we just then not only hope but also to get and obtain help and assurance from the democratic West countries. So maybe we could go to the last one, Mr. Ashatri, if you may.
Yeah, I would like to echo Mrs. Rin and Mr. Andrea as well. Yeah, we do have support from a lot of other countries, from the Western countries, in terms of financials, expertise. I would say a lot of trainings we receive from them. But what I've mentioned as well, we do have, like, let's say, the human rights mechanisms that are present out there, like the International Human Rights Body, UNHCR, UNHR. Let's say they have mechanisms, like they would have a special rapporteur on certain topics, like special rapporteur on freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and so on. So we do report the conditions of Malaysians to these bodies, who would later would urge the governments for more they can do is like having a meeting with the government officials to talk about how they can improve this the civic space and democratic space in Malaysia. I would say as well, in terms of other kind of supports that we receive, would be in terms of the solidarity that we would appreciate in terms of the human rights defender, because sometimes human rights defender themselves would receive a lot of threats and lot of risk from the government. So any terms of support in terms of specialty in terms of internet security, physical security would be much appreciated, and we do have received a lot of this support from a lot of other external members and also parties.
Okay, nice. Thank you very much. Since this is the first question from Mr. or Miss HB, thank you also for asking such elaborative question, and maybe that is also a loophole in my question further on. Thank you for the question again, Mr. or Miss HB. And now I would like to move on maybe to the third question for this webinar, is that it is also mentioned before in our previous talk and discussion that there are no concrete mechanisms, there are no concrete accountability or the mandate for human rights issues in Asia, and also from the respective countries mentioned by Ms. Indria, Mr. Al-Shatri, and Mr. Suren. So maybe I would like to ask, what should be the first step done in order to engage or to make that concrete mechanisms, that accountability exists if it weren't for the state? Maybe I would go from Mr. Suran first.
Yeah, I think to have such a mechanism from state involvement from the government side, I think that is quite a difficult thing because Asia is quite a huge region, and we have various ethnicities and different type of countries. So this I don't think we will able to have a state involved mechanism as other regions have, like European Court of Human Rights or Africa has. Like we will be not able to have such a thing for the whole region. But at least I think we have, like for East Asia and some regions, we have like non-governmental organizations involved mechanisms, and maybe we can have something like that for the region. And as I remember, some time back, we in South Korea, in Gwangju, there was a declaration published for like Asian Human Rights Declaration. So such attempts has made, but we were not able to continue with those declarations or mechanisms. But I think as non-governmental organizations around this region, we can form some sort of a mechanism to at least support human rights defenders and human rights issues in the region. Especially, I think the documentation is very important, documenting human rights violations and other issues. And also, it is important to use other mechanisms like UN mechanisms, like we can give support regionally to go to UN mechanisms, like we have some sort of mechanism like that regarding torture, like as a Sri Lankan human rights defender working on torture, I can get the help of some regional organization to go to UN CAT and file individual complaints. Like some sort of a support system can be established within the region. Also, I think it is really important to have good regional human rights organizations. I think Forum Asia and some organizations are there. So expanding their capacity and having some sort of a mechanism like to address issues in Asia can be fruitful. And if we can have like a proper document to work with in this region, I think that will be effective. Thank you.
Okay, I can conclude several things, but before I do that, I would like to head on first to Mr. Ashatri to answer. Please do.
Like Mrs. Surya had mentioned just now, we lack of mechanisms in our regional level, right? So if we look at Europe, they have European human rights courts. With North America, they also have North American human rights courts. I think that's something that we can look into as well in Asia, or let's say ASEAN country first, because Asia is a big region, right? So maybe we can focus on ASEAN. I like to be talking about ASEAN region. Maybe we can start to work towards the creations of ASEAN human rights courts. Maybe it's a far-fetched from what we have right now, but we can start by creating like people's tribunals by using, let's say, we can start using the Asian People Forums to have this kind of tribunal style of hearings. Maybe we can move to have national human rights institutions first to propose the topics and to propose the cases that what they want to present, and this can be the basis of making all mechanisms to form ASEAN human rights court in ASEAN countries. And maybe this can be developed into to empower ASEAN as a regional body to take up more human rights agenda as in their discussions. So maybe I'm proposing that we have ASEAN human rights courts to begin with currently. Yeah.
Okay, so I can see here that Mr. Al-Shatri here has the same point as Mr. Suran, but adds a bit about the Asia People Forum before we head on to the bigger scope of it. So maybe we could head on next to Miss Indria first. You may, Miss Indria.
Yeah, this is the most challenging one. Yeah, I agree with Suran that and also Muhammad that Asia is very huge region. I remember at the time when some of the NGOs in Asia tried to develop the Asia Human Rights Declaration, and this is really difficult even to have a consensus among the NGOs. But I think it has not to be stopped. We still have to be ongoing because I remember how the establishment of the regional mechanism in Europe or even in Latin America, they also and Africa, yeah, they also facing those kind of steps, yeah, when like it takes some process, need some consensus, need some various discussion. So I think it has to be still ongoing, and I know that it is also need an advocacy and tireless from the civil society to also still supporting those issues. But in ASEAN, I think we have a small possibility when we already have the international ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission of Human Rights, ICHR. Of course, we also understand that among ICHR, which is ICHR is part of the ASEAN, and there are many principles, like for example, non-interferences, try to respecting each other, Asian values, and all those kind of things, which is also become an obstacle how they deal with the human rights issue. Accountability is the most difficult one, of course, but even if they want to protect, if they want to fulfill the human rights issue, they still have a problem on this because of those kind of principles. So I think a part of the process, we should strengthening the regional mechanism. At least I think in this kind of situation, because shrinking space is become a main problem now in Asia, they should have a standard setting actually. How the democratic country has to be ongoing, for example. It is like the same situation in the UN when the convention have the general comment and those kind of things. So they have a standard setting, and they have requirement if the democratic country have those kind of requirement. Like for example, provide freedom of expression, freedom of journalists, protect for the human rights defender, because this is the issue that ICHR agreed on about the protection of human rights defenders. Then we have to put that as an opportunity, I think. So push them to do something big, but maybe it's more easy for them. And also, I think looking some of the opportunity when they already agreed on. Like for example, one is the issue of protection of human rights defender. Second, the issue of the protection of sexual violence against women, the issue of migrant worker, the issue of effective remedy even. I think we have to push them to at least having a consensus among the ASEAN countries to deal with this issue. Because even asking a consensus among the countries, that's also difficult. So I think as a part of the process, on the fulfillment of the human rights, we have to come to that step because we also understand that asking for the accountability is the most difficult one. We always criticize them that they don't have a tweet because they don't really come on the issue of protection of human rights. So I think we have to look for various possibility. I think for the current situation, ICHR of Indonesia, ICHR of Malaysia is quite open for the discussion, and I think this is our opportunity to, like really looking what is the possible one to support the human rights defender, provide a space of freedom of expression in countries under the regional mechanism. Small, but looking for the small opportunity on that.
Now this is what I was looking for, since when I was writing this and along with other A3T members for this specific question, I remember in the previous webinar when it was held October or November, I forgot. I think it was October when I held webinar with Muslim India, and I asked, what are the possibilities or what should be done in order to solve a lot of torture issues in Asia or just in your country. The same goes to what Kiriti from Muslim India told, and it is very, very familiar to what Suren, Mr. Ashatri, and also Miss Indria told me before, that we should just go on with the entire mechanism that has been done by the CSOs, maybe like strengthening the cooperation between members of the CSO itself, the regional CSO, national CSO. So we should just keep going in that. And I want to highlight also a great point from the three speakers. Although it will be difficult because it's still on the initiative of the state itself for the existing mechanism and the accountability for human rights issues, but we have several things that can be caught up in order to solve maybe the gross human rights past violations and the recent human rights violations, the criminalization of HRDs. We can use the first documentation of human rights issues and other mechanism issues such as the supporting of the HRDs and also regional mechanisms that we have at the moment that have been mentioned before by Ms. Indria and Mr. Al-Shatri. And also we can support the mechanism through the Asia Forum, and what Ms. Indria told us in her last sentence, that it can create a big opportunity in order to push the democracy strengthening from the HRDs and CSOs in Asia. So this is the answer I've been looking for when writing this question with the other A3T members. So thank you very much for the elaboration, speakers. Now, the last is probably not a question, but maybe just a little bit of a storytelling, a sharing session with the speakers we have here at the moment. Can you please just maybe share us the experience of being HRD in your country, maybe after being threatened or criminalized, and how do you get back from there? How do you still get up in order to push democracy in your own country? I would like to start first from Mr. Ashatri. Please do.
Okay, I think I can share a little bit based on my short experience. I think in Malaysia as well, yeah, I think a lot of people who've been working in human rights area have been faced with a lot of investigations or restrictions by a lot of things in Malaysia. Me myself, I think I do what I do in Swaram is I do campaigns and case management of police abuse and police accountability. So I do a lot of campaignings around creating oversight mechanisms on our police, mainly to establish the independent police complaints and misconduct commissions, which I think this have been going on since 2005. So a lot of people before me, my seniors, have been working on these particular issues for more around 15 years already, right? Or 15, 16 years. So it haven't been realized yet. So I would say it was a long journey. So for those who are out there who've been thinking about doing the same things, it's gonna take a long time. And sometimes you would face a hurdle where it might looks like you might get there, but it's not yet, right? So when that situation happens, actually, then is when your spirit usually get crashed down. So I'm lucky that I have a lot of support systems around me. I have my colleagues, I have my friends around me that understand what I do, and they also understand that situation in Malaysia is very difficult. To push for changes, you take a lot of time, a lot of initiatives, a lot of different re-strategized meetings after meetings of re-strategizing. So this can wear you down. So I think that without the supports of people who are around you, especially your family members, your friends, are the most crucial part of your support system, I would say. And as for being investigated or being targeted towards the governments as well, this can lead to some kind of stress, some kind of anxiety, things like that. I would say these are also things that need to be looked upon by human rights worker or people who are working in this area, to also look into mental health issues of those working in this area, because it can be sometimes quite traumatizing, and also we're wearing your mental fitness as well from time to time. But I'm lucky because in Malaysia, I would say we have a huge community here that can offer you a lot of helps. So I'm so grateful for that. And also our friends in other countries like Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, we always give solidarity to each other. So when we see fellow human rights defender being targeted towards harassment and everything, we always jump in with solidarity. So I think that's the most important things as well, as form of support, moral support for us. So I would say it's been a pleasure, even though I've seen a lot of unhappiness, but also there's much more things that can be grateful about, because I know that I've been working something meaningful, and also something that I like, and it's been quite a pleasure, been knowing fellow human rights defender like Mr. Surya and Mr. Indra here. So yeah, for me it's been a pleasure.
A very heart-touching moment from Mr. Al-Shatri. I would also maybe give appreciation for Swaram, who have been regularly posting what has been happening in Malaysia and sending solidarity to all Asia forum members. I also follow Swaram's Instagram and Twitter, and also Facebook, where they post a lot recently about the mismanagement of the detainees. So I hope that the case is going well also, since they are also having a petition regarding the not only the detainees, but I forgot what are the other the things that you are having open solidarity at the moment. But I highly appreciate all of the efforts done in one timeline. So thank you very much, Swaram, for your efforts. Now moving on to Mr. Suren, if you please.
Yes, like especially regarding torture cases, we always go, like, we file cases against the police and the state apparatus. So in most of these cases, like, we get sometimes calls from sometimes from the police officers itself, sometimes from our colleagues, from lawyers. So they approach our friends, and they approach different, like, whoever they can approach to stop with proceeding with these cases. So sometimes they go to our houses, and yeah, So like especially when it is torture, I think that is always against the police. Most of the time it is against the police. So and they also know like who are the people who are doing these cases and likewise. So that is always there. And there are some instances that they have reached my clients and somehow convinced to withdraw these cases as well. So so it is always sometimes disturbing, like when our clients get into more trouble and they receive, like they were charged with more cases because of we are fighting for their incidents, torture incidents. So apart from that, like the organizations that I closely work with, the staff of the organizations were called to the TID, and there were questions about our activities, and that has happened to some other organizations as well. Also, in the last December, the organization that I really working close was having their Human Rights Day, and that was stopped by a court order. That's why the Human Rights Day was, we had to postpone it. It happened in this January, so there were some incidents and we had to go to court and police. They were they had some issues with some of our participants. Some of our participants were the people who the families who their family members are detained under Prevention of Terrorism Act. So so that is why we had such issues. So we were closely monitored during these days. So it is always we have that thing, like we have these threats and all the time. So I think it is very important to do networking with other colleagues like we have here, Suram and the other organization. And yeah, so I think it is very important to have these sort of discussions, because we all work in that same we work with the same issues, and we all have the same problems as countries. So the networking is really important. And especially I know, like now the trend is mostly, as Mohammed said, like like when something happened, the relocation is mostly in the regional level. Now the organizations, they don't like relocate to other parts of the world. Mostly they try to relocate within the region. So it is important to have some relationship, some networking with the regional organizations and human rights defenders, so to face all sort of these troubles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I really do hope, because Mr. Suran have stated to me before, to all of us before, that there is a very, very strict restriction of publications. Mr. Suran is joining us right now in the webinar, and I hope it doesn't threaten him after this. So really hope the best for you, Mr. Suran, and also your friends also. And now we go to Miss Indria, please.
Yeah, I think the trend in Indonesia now that civil society are being targeted, what should be seen as a valuable role in society, yeah, ensuring that government and carry out with the good governance in a transparent way, free from corruption, and also bringing the fundamental issue, a human rights issue in their governance. The current situation, I think we also might follow, yeah, that my colleagues, actually, the coordinator of Contrast, of course, Fatia, and the member of Contrast, we are the member of Contrast as well. Haris Azhar become a target for the defamation for the case on against the company actually, but it happens in Papua when they try to sending the report and also the involvement of this company in Papua. So it's connecting with the two issue. First is criticizing the government, which is also Heaven company, but also the minister, yeah, but also and the situation in Papua. Those issues is very risky, I think, in Indonesia, and they both in coming in that those issues. So the privilege of those person is because both of them are quite well known and they based in Jakarta. They get many support from not just from the national but also international. There are also an issue from the international UN Special Rapporteur of Human Rights Defenders. But the case is still ongoing, even though they have those kind of privilege. Yeah. So can you imagine how the people in the ground in the field who doesn't have any connection and privilege, how the easily attack them or criminalize them, even in one or two cases, killing them as well. So this is the situation in Indonesia now. There's also previous one. There's a case for the activists of the anti-corruption. It's also related with their research, and they publish the research and they criticize the government. So this has become a trend. One of the journalists also having those kind of situation. What I want to say that even this has become a trend now, but it is also as a result again about impunity, what really happened in the past. Because previously, even though we don't have any issue on the human rights defender, what they call human rights defender, but there are many human rights defenders as well in the past who also have those kind of threat and intimidation. I was in contrast at that attack from from the offices that attack was that attack from the military, from the how you call it, the extremism group, and again at the time there's no accountability on those process. So that's why I think for now in Indonesia, civil society group try to advocate about the protection of human rights defender in line with what really happened in the global, because there are many issues on the protection of human rights defenders and also bringing our peer solidarity. I agree with Muhammad and Surem as well about the situation in the region, bringing the solidarity, but also try to like protection protecting ourselves. So in some way we are having like urgent fund, for example, if there is something happen, or like a safe house. The case of the sexual violence against women, for example, now is also being high, and we are trying to be dealing with the lawyers who work on those issues. The academics issue, there's many restrictions for the academics in the countries. So there's some groups of academics also dealing with this issue. So there are many groups on professional issue, on lawyers, on academics, on teachers, on the women group, and they are trying to consolidate and also supporting each other. So I think from that issue, we can see that pressure from the civil society is bringing at least how you call it, yeah, the attention from the government. Then I think that's all that we can do, because of course we want to ask the revision of the law, for example, but this is also looking for the time dealing with those issues. And we cannot intervene about the judicial process if the process is already ongoing. So I think that's the role of. I really agree about how we have to strengthening ourselves as civil society, dealing with the different kind of actors, journalists, migrants, workers, women groups. Now it's also disabilities group, minority groups. So we can face that we also become a target because the risk of the situation in the country. And I think we are trying to also ensure about well-being. I think it's also the same with Muhammad. Muhammad, I think feeling their own personal because you are facing this kind of situation. But from us, I mean, I don't have any individual attack, but I follow some of the cases and become a lawyer as well. So we are trying to ensure about the well-being and also mental health, of course, particularly about what the situation now, yeah, dealing with this digital security. So there are many risks for the human rights defenders, and I think this is become again, if we say about the international regional mechanism, the ICHR also stated that human rights defender protection become one of their concerns. So I think we have to also advocate this issue in the regional level. At least they have one is a standard setting about that one. The second one have their internal procedure, for example, if there's something happen and the perpetrators is state, for example, and how they deal with that. And I think again we have to use those small opportunity in ASEAN and ICER to deal about this one.
Thank you very much for your elaboration, Ms. Indria, and how you also point out our recent case in Indonesia with regards to HRD and how several oppositions tried to attack our HRD who were trying to voice out the case that has been happening in Papua. So thank you very much for pointing out that. And with that, that was our last question for the webinar. So after this, before I say thanks to all the speakers, I think I would like to hear, the audience will also like to hear several maybe quotations or closing statement from the speaker. I would like to begin first from Mr. Ashatri. You may.
So I would say, yeah, strategic space, civic space, and civil democratic space is something real. Been happening throughout the world, and also as ASEAN, we are emerging economy, and of course, this emerging economy, we will gain a lot of more people living in this country. So there will be more human rights violations. So I would say that we should not forego our human rights in the name of development, whatever the circumstances is, and we should always be in solidarity and always try to protect our fellow human rights defender and our human rights in general in in ASEAN and in Asia in general. So I would thank Contrast, A3T, Mr. Surin and Mr. Adria for sharing. I've learned a lot today from you guys as well. And I'm keen to learn a lot more from my fellow seniors and my fellow colleagues in the human rights sphere. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ashatri. I forgot, I was supposed to call you just Mr. Muhammad, but since you have reminded me before. Okay, that's fine. So I would move on next to Mr. Suren, if you may.
Yeah, first I would like to thank Asian Alliance Against Torture and Contras and Nadine for having me and having this discussion. And thank you for Indria and Mohammed for having this fruitful discussion. And I think we should have more and more discussions and webinars like this to analyze these issues in our region. It seems like most of us are facing like similar human rights issues in this region, and that comparison is also very important. And as Mohammed said like several times, that solidarity and this networking and this is very important at this region. So thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you very much to you also, Mr. Suren. Now, next, I will give the microphone to Miss Indria.
Yeah, I also want to say thank you about learning each other about the experiences in the countries. I think we are not just learning about the attack and intimidation, but also learning about our resilience, our persistence to advocate and campaign about the human rights protection in countries. So I think this is the most important one when we were facing on the difficult situation, not just in country but also in Asia. So I think we have to strengthening each other, of course, not just because we deal with the difficult one, but also looking for the innovative way on dealing with this issue. I know that in countries we always face that uh, uh, it seems like there's no opportunity at all in countries. Uh, we have an international mechanism, but this is like far away, of course, and we don't have any regional mechanism. So it seems like we are in the face in the dark situation. But I think the history show us that like there are many innovative way that we can do to strengthening each other. And I think in this kind of situation, the digital issue, the positive impact of the pandemic that we can speak each other more closely. Previously, we have to meet each other and need some time for transportation and plane. So for now, we can more easy for this. So I think we have to use this kind of opportunity to like bring also having a strategic way together how to deal with the shrinking space trend in Asia and how civil society have to deal about this together, because uh, 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 not just for the supporting each other, but yeah, looking for small opportunity in the region, for example, or how to deal with the international mechanism. So I think strengthening civil society ourselves is more important when we face on the dark situation. So I think that could be bring us more hopes rather than just like, oh, we cannot do nothing on this kind of situation. Again, thank you very much for all experiences, and I learned a lot from this session as well. Thank you, Nadine.
No, thank you. Thank you to all of the speakers here. When Mr. Suren, Mr. Muhammad, and also Miss Indria told me, I learned a lot. I learned a lot too, since I was basically just held this webinar only a couple of months ago, and I learned a lot about the loopholes and also the strategical ways on how to solve human rights violations, including the shrinking democracy. So yeah, I learned a lot from this webinar as well. Now, just to conclude several things for the audience and the listeners out there. First is that we have to acknowledge still that the state uses not only force but also online based attacks as a tool to shut the mouths and the acts of freedom and also expression to the society in majority. So it is still questionable on how the state still compromises democracy when the implementation itself is still far from the word and the definition itself. And now next is that the root cause for how this still kept happening in Asia, from all countries in Asia, is that the absence of accountability to be held responsible by the country, the state, or the agents of the government itself. And there is a constitutional dictatorship and also the absence of check and balances within the government. So these create a large loophole and the characteristic of neglection of how the government and other states in Asia perceive human rights and also torture issues in Asia. And next is that, of course, this will be a difficult and a tough challenge for HRDs, CSOs to solve human rights violation cases, especially torture issues in Asia, since it is still the state's initiative to solve it all for the existence of rule of law itself and also the existence of the mechanism and the possible existence to create accountability for human rights issues. But this can be again solved as answered by Mr. Surin, Miss Indria, and also Mr. Muhammad, that documentation of human rights issues and the other mechanisms as the strengthening of the country, the CSO itself is one of the great solutions in order to make a breakthrough on on the absence of mechanism itself. And it could be a big opportunity also to push the democracy strengthening in each countries. And this existing mechanism should still run, since if we stop the wheel of the wheel that turns towards democracy will not run as well. So I think that is all for the webinar today. I thank you all for the audience who have participated in this webinar and asked also. And I would like to also thank all of the speakers who have attended here and give their knowledge, their elaborations on the field and also theoretically regarding shrinking democracy in Asia. So I'm Nadine Sharani Salsabila, checking out from this webinar.